talked about it in letters, and we talked about it on the phone. But how you really feel about it, I don't really know.
What's your take on Cassavetes? 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 Misogynist, genius, misogynist, genius, misogynist, genius, misogynist, genius. What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on?
Welcome to There's Sometimes a Buggy, Irresponsible Opinions About Classic Film. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave. This week we close out the Hollywood Studios Year by Year for 1934 with Universal. We'll be talking about Edgar Ulmer's The Black Cat and James Whale's One More River. So two very interesting films from the house of Carl Laemmle Jr.
For The Black Cat, I read the section dealing with it in Noah Eisenberg's biography of Ulmer, Edgar G. Ulmer, a filmmaker at the margins, from 2014, so not purchased quite as long ago as I thought I had purchased it, and let it sit here unread. And only today, picking it up, did I notice that ex-husband Guy Madden is quoted on the back of it in connection with My Winnipeg, which was the only film role, I think, certainly the only major film role that Anne Savage had after Ulmer's detour. The authenticity of her performance in that having ruined her career, basically. Established her among cinephiles forever, but ruined her career among working actresses.
On the back of that book, along with Molly Haskell, the ubiquitous Peter Bogdanovich, and Dave Kerr.
Well, Bogdanovich, actually, I think he was instrumental, from what I've been reading, in reestablishing Ulmer's reputation. He did a big interview with Ulmer, and there's a documentary, which we have but haven't watched yet. I think Bogdanovich is featured in that.
He's in every single
Is he still
movie.
alive?
Yeah, of course.
He'll never die.
No. Be on every DVD and Blu-ray for the next 30 years. I'm not always thrilled with Bogdanovich. I do feel like he falls into ruts sometimes, but he's done good work.
Some good revisionist work, as with Ulmer. Jerry Lewis, I think he's a big Jerry Lewis fan at a time when that was not remotely popular.
Well, he's a big fan of just about everything.
To do with film, yeah. You were saying, produced by Carl Laemmle Jr. Given our topic for this series, Studios Year by Year, you were talking, when we were first theorizing Universal as a studio, you were talking about the important role played by, or speculating about the important role played by Laemmle Jr., because that's not something that you said that happens a lot in...
Not in the discourse that I've read. Now, I'm always hoping that that's changing.
In Morden's book. I was trying to remember
in
Morden's name.
Yeah, Morden's book does nothing with Laemmle Jr. He just treats Universal as an anachronism, right? That's his big hook for Universal. It's that Carl Laemmle Sr. was a dinosaur who didn't really know how to adjust to the sound era. Time ran out on them. Basically, they're just always several steps behind all the industry leaders.
Well, Eisenberg definitely has nothing good to say about Laemmle Sr., who sounds like just a complete Philistine.
Yeah, I don't have any interest in Laemmle Sr. either. He's one of these guys, a pioneer. He took some chances early on and reaped some rewards, but Laemmle Jr.
Obviously, Laemmle Jr. comes across as the man at this point in 1934 in creative control, and as being, if not any kind of genius, at least very open to new ideas.
I've always had a kind of nebulous idea of what he's like, but he's so protean. There's so much different stuff coming out of Universal for the first 6 years of the 30s. It's just a marvel to behold. Makes you yearn to know a little bit more about what this guy was actually thinking, this kid who inherited a studio and ran it into the ground in 6 years by making cool movies.
Yeah, and of course, this wouldn't be the most generous assessment possible of Laemmle Jr. because Ulmer notoriously is, due to this very production, about to have very personal trouble with the Laemmles that ruined his career. This was his big shot in Hollywood filmmaking, and he certainly made the most of it. However, that was the end of his chances as an A-list director.
Yeah, and I think that you can be very interested in Ulmer and Laemmle Jr. and understand that there's some fault in there. Laemmle Jr., if they blacklisted Ulmer, well, that's pretty bad. But still, I'm really interested in the output of the studio.
Blacklisted for stealing the wife of a relative of the Laemmles.
Yeah.
Who he met on this film, who was the script supervisor for it. And the marriage lasted, I think, as far as I know, for the rest of their lives, so...
And it was a kind of a creative partnership. Yeah, they kept working together.
She continued to be his script supervisor, yeah.
So, yeah, I think it was probably worth it.
That's like a devil's bargain, isn't it?
Well, in retrospect...
Career or wife?
Also career, right? Because it enabled him to forge ahead with this weirdest of all possible careers that now enthralls us. At the time, obviously he didn't make the money that he was about to come in for.
And can you really imagine, like, look what happened to James Whale, look what happened to Joseph von Sternberg. Can you really imagine a director with the sensibility of The Black Cat succeeding for long in Hollywood? No.
Well, the thing is, Universal was the place for these people, right? James Whale was doing whatever he wanted until Laemmle Jr. was out of the picture, and then he got destroyed.
Yeah, well, see?
And he probably would have protected Ulmer too, except for this indiscretion that has nothing to do with politics or aesthetics or anything else, just bad interpersonal things.
But Sternberg, of course, was allowed to do whatever he wanted until his movies stopped making money for Paramount, and then a little while longer, and then he was effectively blacklisted as well.
Right.
But back to Ulmer. Let's do the basic outline of the career here.
Yeah, we've never talked about him on the podcast before.
We mentioned him in passing.
Sure.
That's about it. And this is all stuff, me looking at his Wikipedia entry here, was all stuff I'd never known or thought about before. He was born in the Czech Republic. He was Jewish Moravian. He lived and worked as a young man in Vienna. He did set design for Max Reinhardt, like apparently everybody, and served his apprenticeship, doesn't say here whether as set designer or director or both, with F.W. Murnau. He worked on the now famous experimental documentary-style fiction film People on Sunday with Siodmak, Wilder, and Zinnemann, all future big Hollywood names. He claimed to have worked, I believe, in a art direction and design capacity on the 1920 Der Golem, Metropolis, and M, but there is no independent evidence to support this. So nobody knows if he's a blowhard or just a guy who didn't get enough credit.
It's probably somewhere in between.
Oh, here we have it. Ulmer came to Hollywood with Murnau in 1926 to assist with the art direction on Sunrise.
So that's definitely true.
That is established.
And that's an incredible looking film, so everyone that had a part in that.
This is what makes me think that why would he make up all these other connections? I mean, he certainly was capable of working on the films, but who knows? And of course, so is The Black Cat an incredible looking film.
Yes, very distinctive. It's long been famous for its Art Deco haunted house.
Yeah, I mean, that is right away the most astounding thing about it.
The architectural feat.
Yeah, which was from the model of the house on the hill, the exterior, to the interior design of the house. This was, of course, all created by Ulmer, although he worked with an art director, of course, Charles D. Hall.
Okay.
Oh, and both of these films, which we saw in very nice-looking DVD restoration, on both of them the cinematographer was John Mescal.
Oh, they both looked great. This film was inspired by the Edgar Allan Poe story, The Black Cat. That's what the credits tell us. Doesn't seem to be much of Poe except a guy that's afraid of a cat, and that's not even quite what The Black Cat is about.
I don't remember The Black Cat, but it does say in the book that it was one of those ideas that Universal had to adapt The Black Cat, and it went through several script treatments and then ultimately ended up in Ulmer's hands.
This has as much to do with the concept of The Black Cat as any of those RKO movies of the 40s by Luton have to do with their titles.
And it's not even as close as, I guess, Murders in the Rue Morgue, which was a Universal horror film that we covered in this series.
Yeah, at least Murders in the Rue Morgue has a bunch of plot elements from that story. This has nothing of the Black Cat, just a guy that hates a cat.
Yeah,
That's
and
it.
Apparently Joseph Breen, one of the things that Breen was concerned about, because we are in the year of the code, was the depiction of cruelty to animals.
Well, it's not actually shown tone, but there's some
Well, that's why.
allusions to bad things happening to cats, which I don't like.
But you like this film.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
So what is the film about, since it's not about the Poe story?
Current critical consensus is that this wave of horror films from the early 30s, so much of it is rooted in the trauma of World War I, and this one really is. I mean, it foregrounds
Well,
that.
it's explicit. What other films do they talk about in those terms?
Well, all of them. Just the disfigurement, the horror of people coming home with missing limbs and faces destroyed by poison gas.
They're just trying to account for the popularity of the horror genre. Certainly German Expressionism, which gives birth to the style of a lot of those films, I mean, that would have been directly rooted.
Mass death on a scale that people had not been familiar with for quite a while, or maybe ever, before 1914 to 1918, right?
But of course, World War I, it didn't touch America that much, did it?
Well, it did in the sense that Americans went there and for the last year and a half were involved in it. They didn't lose the same kind of numbers of people as the European belligerents did.
Right, but it was enough to inspire that Forgotten Man number.
Oh, well, that's a different matter. That's the Depression.
Well, yeah, but it alludes to the veterans of the war.
Sure, who were supposed to be getting their bonuses, and that was infinitely deferred, right? There was a bonus march. That was more about a working class revolt or potential working class revolt. But don't forget, all of these horror films are primarily from people who were from Europe.
I'm not forgetting that. I was getting there.
Yeah, okay. They're springing this on American audiences who were not quite as familiar with the endless years of charnel house death that British and French and Germans and Austrians and Russians would have been.
But this is the second remarkable thing, or the second remarkable thing to notice about this film, is the fact that it explicitly draws on war as the source of horror.
In particular, the Austro-Hungarian experience of that mess of a war.
Yes, because we have an Austrian and a Hungarian.
Right, and the film is made by a guy. You said he was born in the Czech Republic, but there was no Czech Republic at that
Moravian.
time.
I said he was Moravian.
Part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, when Ulmer was born and when he was growing up.
Oh, I see. So Wikipedia was being inaccurate then. What is now the Czech Republic?
The place of birth is in the Czech Republic. The significance of that is that the Austro-Hungarian Empire destroyed all of its own people during that war. It was not really ready, technologically backward, and got thrown into this war that it kind of set into motion. And then they just lost and lost and lost. They couldn't really beat anybody. They kept having to be pulled out of the fire by the Germans, their allies. There was kind of an endless, horrifying stalemate between Austria-Hungary and the Russians on the Eastern Front that was really only ended when the Bolsheviks took power and declared a separate peace, pissing off everyone on the Western Front. So Polzig is playing a general. I guess he was a general. Anyway, he was in charge of this segment of the army and made it possible for all of them to die, basically. That's what Lugosi accuses him of. So completely heedless of the lives of all of the people thrown into his charge.
And they keep making reference to this fort that he abandoned that became this mass graveyard that the house is built on. A masterpiece of construction built upon the ruins of a masterpiece of destruction.
Some kind of logistical nightmare that occurred where Karloff just took off and left his people to die fighting the Russians, who were also completely disorganized and technologically backward.
And what has happened here? Okay, so the third remarkable thing about this movie that I've noted on first viewings is that it is unusually abstract for a film of its time. And so I managed to... I love this film. I've watched it over a dozen times, but I've managed to watch it this many times and note the theme without paying particular attention either to the plot or to trying to articulate its meaning. As often when that happens, this is going to be my first attempt at really trying to think it through. Because you can just watch this movie and kind of treat it as a poem. You can treat it as being almost as abstract, with its themes and meanings being as vague as a David Lynch film.
Sure. Now, it does have a kind of Henry James quality, which I'm sure you'd appreciate. It's got these Americans abroad on their honeymoon, coming face to face with even more horrific aspects of European culture.
Absolutely, I thought of that. Kind of the missing link between James's European theme and Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah, something like that.
No, not something like that. I'm absolutely sure that this film either directly inspired Rocky Horror Picture Show or established the trope that is most famous in Rocky Horror Picture Show of the two innocents that meet the evil doctor, basically. Although in Rocky Horror Picture Show, they are made over into his image and get to become a little bit less repressed. That's not what happens here. Apparently the script had the wife character, Joan. She's designated as hyper-virginal. It was either in the script or there were scenes shot where the movie began with their wedding and there were shots comparing her to the Madonna.
Okay. David Manners and Jacqueline Wells, the couple, they're thrown into this maelstrom created by lifelong or decades-long enmity between Karloff and Lugosi.
It also, of course, and we mentioned this when we talked about Bride of Frankenstein on one episode, clearly...
Yeah, it inspired the end of that movie.
And yeah, not only inspired the end of the movie, but clearly the whole modernist Art Deco horror movie design idea that's also perfectly executed in Bride of Frankenstein came from this movie too. So yeah. Ulmer is the innovator here, although Whale may have perfected it. I don't really want to choose between them.
No, they're both pretty great. They do make a good double feature, I think. Lugosi doesn't yell, "We belong dead," but he might as well have yelled that at the end of this movie as he blows up the entire mountain.
And another thing Breen was worried about was the suggestion of homosexuality between our pair. I see nothing. I mean, it's all about their rivalry over these women. I see nothing to suggest that, but they have the homoerotic, intense relationship of, you know, Batman and Joker, of all of those immortal enemies who are so obsessed with each other.
Oh yeah, they're engaged in some kind of serious
relationship,
eternal struggle. We should talk a bit about where these two stars were in their careers at this time. Lugosi, already in the down phase of his career after scaling the heights of Dracula.
And Eisenberg brings up the old chestnut about Lugosi being a ham in this movie, and it's not true at all. They both give incredibly restrained performances and are both equally stylized. I saw no hamminess from Lugosi in this.
Few people love Bela Lugosi as much as I do, so I really want to applaud the way he delivers. I mean, he's got a harder job in this movie, I think, because his character is supposed to be both terrifying and extremely sympathetic.
Oh, yeah, and you know what? Actually, the moment when they are looking at the dead wife in that glass case, one of the greatest moments of horrifying visual poetry in cinematic history, and surely inspired the underwater scene in Night of the Hunter.
That's true, yeah.
When they're looking at her and Vitus Verdegast, whose name apparently means "I will be a guest," as he is twice in this movie. He forces himself on all of the other characters as a guest. When he's looking at her and he registers her death and the horror of her preservation, he's very, very moving.
Yeah, I agree.
In a scene that should not have any kind of emotional reality. It is there in Lugosi's face. They are great in this movie. Have they ever been better other than, you know, but the Frankenstein performance is so different because he's in full makeup. It's a whole different, he's doing it all with his body. And of course, Karloff does a lot with his body here too. Oh, sorry, where was Karloff at this point?
Well, Karloff was riding high on the strength of the first Frankenstein film and then moving into the Old Dark House and The Mummy. Big hits, right?
He's an incredibly strong visual presence in this film, Karloff, but he kind of really hands it to Lugosi, hands the star performance and the star role to Lugosi.
Yeah, it's very generous of him, and also that's just how the script is set up. Lugosi has the complicated persona. Pelzig is a Satanist. You can't get more one note than that in a lot of ways.
Well, and this is where I'm interested in kind of teasing out the meanings of this film. When I first saw it, I'm not a historian like you, Dave, so when I first saw this in my early 20s, I was very, very mentally confused about history and also dates of films. And even though I kept reminding myself that this film was made in the early 30s, I kept thinking that it was about World War II because the imagery seemed so evocative of the Nazi regime, starting with Marmarash. It's so evocative of a concentration camp. This whole idea of this mass grave, of this impersonal looking building set atop of it.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if it's anticipating some of that.
This is what I was trying to get at. Ulmer, of course, like many expatriates, knew exactly what was going on in Germany at the time.
And he could see where Hitler was headed, I'm sure.
And he says that he was the one who brought the property of Little Man, What Now to the attention of Laemmle.
Oh,
Of Laemmle
interesting.
Jr., although they ended up handing it to a more experienced director, of course, Borzage.
Who did a beautiful job with it.
Yeah, but Ulmer, of course, would have done something completely different.
Yes, he would have, I'm
And
sure.
also very good, I'm sure. And so, yeah, it really seems like this Satanist figure is someone, played by Karloff, is someone who is emerging from the trauma, like the entire country of Germany, or like the entirety of Europe, emerging from the trauma of World War I and having been twisted into this figure of evil who is about to bring about a second World War.
As much as we now talk about the horror film, the 30s horror film, as one of the big products of the trauma set in motion by World War I, certainly fascism is an even more important world historical hellish thing that was unleashed by World War I. All of it was caused by World War I. Fueling Mussolini's rise and definitely Hitler's stormtroopers. These were people trained in World War I and bitter over what had happened to them there and wanting another crack at this war that they felt had been pulled out from under them just when they were poised to succeed.
And to add some substance to this theory, it's clear from the film's original script that all of these figures who appear at the Black Mass at the end, in the actual released version, are like, who the hell are these people?
They're society figures of some sort.
They're society figures of the Habsburg Empire.
Right, makes sense.
And they all had names, originally, that established that. One of the names of a woman who was going to be featured was Frau Göring.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And by the way, here's a flavor of Ulmer's script writing. Or, sorry, the notes. He didn't write the script by himself, but the notes in the shooting script. The cultists are to be as aberrant as possible, a stable of misfits, members of a decadent aristocracy of the countryside. They are all dressed in keeping with their twisted natures, and give the impression they have been made of old pieces of celluloid, wire, papier-mâché, flesh, and red plush.
What happened to Germany after World War I is that the Kaiser was removed and the Weimar Republic was put in there as an experiment in democracy in Germany. Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Habsburg Empire, which had been going for hundreds of years, was just dismantled completely, right? It didn't exist anymore after 1919. So you got Austria and Hungary, and then all these other countries that had never had a chance to exist before, ethnicities that had been dominated by the Habsburgs.
Another thing to note about the Black Mass scene, because I was wondering about it on this viewing, Karloff is talking in nonsense Latin. A sample, for example, is cum grano salis, fortis cadra non protest. Or, with a grain of salt, the brave may fall, but cannot yield.
Okay.
And according to Eisenberg, this harkens back to Ulmer's classical Jesuit education in wartime Vienna. Where do we go from here in our discussion?
Well, we should start at the beginning with this pleasant train interlude where our newlywed couple are planning to see the sights of Eastern Europe.
David Manners plays the greatest writer of unimportant books in America.
Mysteries.
And this alludes to the writing career of the screenwriter Peter Rurik,
Okay.
who Elmer thought was a budding great playwright, but something went wrong. Much like Elmer himself.
This couple, out for fun, trying to get to know each other, really. We have no indication of how long they were engaged before this, but they don't seem to be perfectly in sync with each other just yet. They're a little tentative in even arriving at the decision to go eat. That's their big conversation at the beginning. Are you hungry? No, I'm not hungry. Oh, actually, I was lying. I'm very hungry. So they're not in sync
I don't know.
yet.
Are they trying to say that
It's time for sex?
Yeah, or do they feel... Yeah, that's one meaning. Or do they feel like they can't admit that they're not going to live on love alone? Who can think of a food at a time like this?
Yeah, either of those. But the thing is that they're not really able to communicate at a high level just yet. They're feeling their way towards each other here.
They can't communicate at the level of Polzig and Verdegast.
No, those two understand each other very well. Before they can really get set on what they're going to do, they are interrupted by the conductor, who apologizes for the inconvenience, but they have
effusively apologizes.
Yeah, they've placed a man in their compartment. It's supposed to be a private compartment where they might have been able to have some train sex, but no. Bela Lugosi's going to sit there with them.
At least just romantic time together.
Yeah. His first appearance here kind of reminds me, it feels like an allusion to Dracula when he appears just outside of the theatrical box that the group is sitting in. Sure. David Manners, also in that film.
David Manners is very much doing the role that you ascribe to...
Helen Chandler?
That you ascribe to Helen Chandler in Dracula, which is that he's making fun of all this a lot of the time until it gets so serious that he needs to get out of there.
Yeah, well, he kind of makes fun of things in Dracula, too, although he's a little bit more with it in this movie, responding to external stimuli a little bit better.
Appropriately.
Yeah, than in Dracula. But I love him in all these movies.
Eisenberg suggests, and probably rightly, that Hollywood wasn't interested in doing horror movies without any comic relief.
Oh, well, we got some pretty goofy comic relief in this one from Henry Armetta, especially.
And apparently there was supposed to be even more. Not from those guys necessarily, but Ulmer had plans for even more comic characters. According to Eisenberg, he was wanting to, his plan was to assemble a Sternberg-like production unit on this film that he would be able to use again, including lots of expatriate theater actors. I think it works very well, the comedy, to break up the heavy tone and extreme sickness.
Yes.
Of the rest of the film.
I don't have a problem with them. So these guys take pity on Lugosi and welcome him into their cozy little cabin. He is weird from the start. He's just too intense. He really does want to connect with them and be friends with them, and if they fall asleep, well, he wants to fondle some hair a little bit.
Well, David Manners stares at him saying nothing.
That's amazing. He thinks that Manners is asleep, but he is caught in the act, and then he asks for Manners' indulgence. He just says, please take pity on me. I never got a chance to have any kind of sex life. My beautiful bride was stolen from me during the war while I was in a Russian prison camp.
Yeah.
For many years. We never actually get a response from Manners about this.
Which is great.
Presumably he does accept this as an explanation.
Apparently there's only 10 minutes in this film that doesn't feature the classical music score, but you'd be forgiven for not realizing that because the silences are so effective.
Yes.
And that includes these silences in place of dialogue.
Yeah, it is good. And somehow there's an intimacy that has built up between them here. They are a trio now, and they're going to do a little bit more journeying together after the train pulls in. They get into a bus together because he's going their way. And there's a tour guide at the wheel talking about the horrors of the battlefields that they're journeying through. The mountain and this crazy architectural marvel at the top of it, built by engineer Pozig. But it's a torrential downpour. The roads don't seem to be so good. And they're just washed away, and the bus goes off the cliff. The driver dies.
As he's explaining to them about the horrors that the war wreaked on this neighborhood.
Yeah, one more body for the grave, and they pull everyone else out. There's a burly servant with them, who it turns out, this is kind of opaque, right? It turns out that he is Karloff's servant, but he's actually a double agent working for Lugosi.
No, not a...
Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay.
He's with them in that bus.
He's with them in the bus. This was opaque. I didn't know if he came on the train with Lugosi, or if he was planted at some later point. We don't know.
No, we don't know.
But the fact that it's so gratuitously confusing just makes it all better.
Oh yeah, I don't have a problem with it. And Lugosi does make it clear for us long before the time at the end that it matters, where he says, yes, you're my servant, but you're pretending to be his servant. That's
yeah,
how
that
we're
could
doing
almost
it.
be something from an Ed Wood film that he decided like halfway through the film or something.
Yeah, who knows?
But probably it's just from, all the changes to the script and omissions in the final cut.
Yeah, maybe.
For the release.
I mean, it is integral to what happens. Like, we need to know which side this guy's on for real.
Yeah.
How it got that way, how they became friends and allies without Karloff knowing about it, it's best left to our imagination.
And this was a much lower budget film. I mean, it was his first crack at making a major film, but it was much lower budget than Frankenstein or Dracula, for example.
Course.
So the fact that it does have some of these Ed Wood qualities may be attributable to that.
Makes sense, yeah. As soon as they walk in, Lugosi's been calling Pilzig his friend, but it seems very far from the case.
Yeah, what is the backstory with these two?
Well, they served together in the Austro-Hungarian army. Presumably, Lugosi was of a lower rank, but he was also there and in the officer corps, I imagine.
But they had to be friends for this betrayal to cause this kind of relationship. The obsession could be there if the wife was merely stolen, but it's the betrayal and the echo of the betrayal of all the men at Marmarash.
No, it does seem like there was some warmth or understanding between them some point.
And the woman and the evil of Boris Karloff came between them.
Lugosi has been biding his time. We don't exactly know why. It's been 15 years. He says he's been in prison for a long time, but has he been in prison for 15 years? No. I don't see why he would have still been in a Russian prison into the 30s.
No, he says he followed Karloff and the wife and daughter all over the world, including America and South America.
Yeah, I know, but the time element is a bit confused here, because how long has Karloff been in this castle that he built? And when did he go to America? Yes,
We don't care either.
No, it doesn't really matter.
It's all this beautiful ghostly backstory.
Lugosi's been stewing for a long time about what he would say to Karloff when he sees him.
And there's this idea that there is something supernatural about Karloff, who is some kind of warlock, evidently. Lugosi is really going to have to wait for his moment. And I think he also likes the idea of finishing him off in this symbolic location.
Yeah, he's looking for poetic justice.
Yeah, exactly. It's like Hamlet. Why does Hamlet delay all that time, right? So he's delayed a little longer than Hamlet, but it's the same idea.
You're looking at a plot from the perspective of a Bond villain, plotting against another Bond villain. And one of them is sympathetic, and one of them isn't even trying to be sympathetic. That's the structure of this. And we've got these two people in the middle of it who are only there because their bus got into an accident. Nobody wants them there at first. Karloff sort of decides he can use this young bride in his sacrificial rituals at the end, but she's not essential. He didn't bring them there. He's just living his life and doing his satanic things.
He's improvising. He's like, this innocent woman who is not at all involved in our battle. I think he thinks it would really... Well, he says he's noticed that Lugosi has taken an interest in her. And that's why he wants to...
Kill her.
Piss him off some more.
Yeah.
He's just playing with him.
That's how he gets his kicks. Now, he does say that his life revolves around Karen. We see that
he says that.
Yeah, it's not true, clearly.
Because the minute that he finds out that
she disobeyed him and was exposed.
Or just the fact that he thinks that now Lugosi will get her back, he instantly kills her.
Yes, and embalms her as well. This is what he likes to do.
Well, we get this tour downstairs that he takes Lugosi on when he finally decides to show him what's become of his wife, and...
Well, he only shows Lugosi the one woman, but he's got a whole collection down there.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was getting at.
But yeah, that he saves for himself. When he gets up out of bed, he wanders around his own house quite a bit, looking at his treasures.
The movie, it just so lovingly details all of these hints at infinite perversion in a way that is very original.
It is, yeah.
As well as there being, the perversions are very original, as well as there being some classics, such as Flaying Alive.
Yeah. Embalming people.
Women, in particular, and keeping them in glass cases. I'm sure it's been done in literature before, but maybe not in cinema.
No, the closest you get that I can think of is as Mystery of the Wax Museum, which is not exactly the same thing, but in that movie, Lionel Atwill is dunking people in wax and encasing them in it for forever, right?
Yeah, but Polzig is supposed to be, among other things, an aesthete, and as such, he's designed this beautiful modernist house, and also he turns beautiful women into art objects.
Yeah, and he gives us all kinds of stories about what happened to the first Karen, as the movie goes along. He says she died of pneumonia, which is certainly possible because of the influenza epidemic.
But we see the way he treats the other Karen, so probably that's not what happened. Probably
not.
Verdigast is right.
He just killed her,
On
raised
a
her
whim.
daughter for the past 18 years
Yeah.
or whatever, and then married her.
And then killed her.
Yeah.
It's a cycle he likes to repeat.
Yeah, he's a real freak.
He's very enigmatic, but very one-note evil.
Yeah, but very soft-spoken, obviously not
Charming.
Melodramatic in any way.
Charming and sort of attractive.
Well, if you say so.
Well, I actually find Karloff quite attractive in this movie. I mean, you have to admire that lean, muscular body that gets exposed at the end. Not that I'm saying I'm lusting after it, but there's this kind of balletic beauty to the way he moves and the way
Sure, well,
he's formed in the movie.
when he gets out of
he
bed...
himself is an art object.
When he's shown in shadow getting
Yes.
out of bed, yeah, you definitely see his weird slimness shambling about the house. Yeah. On the other side, Lugosi, he really does seem to be in a bad way insofar as ability to express his sexual feelings has gone over the long time since World War I. That gets expressed in the famous shot where he grabs that statue when he just takes a look at the young couple kissing. It really drives
that
him over the
Lugosi?
edge.
I thought that was Karloff.
No, that's Lugosi.
Oh, okay.
So he's very stimulated by that.
It kind of looks forward to the giant coffee cup in Detour as well. These foregrounded objects.
Yeah, and that's the most famous shot in the film, I think.
Is it? I didn't know that.
As far as I know. I mean, or anyway, with me it is.
But yeah, a lot of foreground shots very much prior to Citizen Kane, obviously.
And he does that, that's right after he pulls out a knife and kills a cat that just wanders in.
The cat does appear to be an embodiment of evil.
Yeah, and it does resurrect itself and comes right back to Karloff, unless he's got a whole stable of them. So...
Yeah, we don't really know again.
prefer to think of that cat as immortal, as...
Immortal evil.
Yeah. That's fine.
But
I just
doesn't
don't
he
want the
sort of-
cat to die.
But doesn't he sort of betray Karloff at the end? Isn't it like Dietrich's cat in Dishonored?
Not really. What does the cat do that betrays
He
him?
seems to lead Karen out of her room so that she finds out...
Okay, well...
So that she finds out about her father, which doesn't actually help her or him, ultimately. So maybe the cat was just being evil, but he's not necessarily loyal, or she is not necessarily loyal to Karloff.
No, okay, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, evil has its own designs, right? It might be cozying up to Karloff at some times.
And he could have even got that from Dishonored because Ulmer was a Sternberg fan.
The cat does help Karloff at a very pivotal moment when Lugosi is about to just shoot him straight up when he sees the embalmed Karen. Lugosi falls back and can't follow through on his initial aim to assassinate Karloff right
Well,
there.
it seems to turn into like a symbol for Lugosi's impotence
Yeah,
to do anything.
Exactly. Trying to achieve something here.
It turns out that the only thing that does save him in the end is this half-human, half-I-don't-know-what automaton of a manservant.
Who is very loyal to him, who's been willing to serve as a double agent in the home of Karloff just to get this revenge.
He takes some bullets and keeps going and going and going until he drops. I mean, the plot is not exactly remarkable for its suspense or its elegance of execution.
No, not really. I mean, it kind of goes the way you expect
well,
once you see how the players are set up.
Yeah, Lugosi can't do anything right for 90% of the movie, but then when it comes to performing the rescue at the end, it is very simple.
Yeah.
That's not what this is about. This is about the style of how we get there.
Yeah, and it's about the eternal underdog, yes, the eternal underling, Lugosi. He can't win at chess. Pilzig tells him, you're not going to win, Vitas.
And he really doesn't. They sit down on those nice little Bauhaus cafeteria chairs to play their game of chess against the backdrop of the mountains.
A psychiatrist versus an engineer, the engineer's going to win a game of chess, most likely. Poker might be different, I don't know. Although this engineer is pretty multifaceted. talented. So yeah, you never feel like Lugosi has the upper hand. He's always trying to talk a big game and get the most that he can out of his righteous fury, but Karloff is always just kind of laughing at him.
Yeah, but he doesn't laugh last.
No, he doesn't.
He
gets
really,
skinned
really
alive.
doesn't.
Well, he doesn't even get skinned alive, so that's the thing.
Well, he gets a few.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit of skinned alive is probably enough.
Lugosi is deprived of his triumph.
That's
for
true.
the most part, because he's so creepy that Manners mistakes him for the enemy at the end and shoots him. And so, in order to make sure that Karloff dies, Lugosi just has to pull the dynamite switch.
Isn't that what Willow does to get revenge for her murdered girlfriend? Doesn't she skin what's-his-face alive?
Oh, yeah.
In Buffy the Vampire Slayer, she's about to do that, right? And then she gets interrupted by Xander and his talk of crayons. I'm wondering if that was inspired by this movie as well.
She goes after
Very well
those
could have been.
3 dorks, yeah.
Yeah. What was the head dork's name again? Oh, I can't even remember. But that is her plan for him.
Sure.
Skinning alive.
She's become very evil, yeah.
Yeah.
And Lugosi...
Well, out of revenge, that's what I'm saying. That is what has happened to Lugosi.
Yeah, I mean, he's been looking into the abyss so long that it has looked back into him and taken him over.
Exactly, yes. So we have lots more gorgeous set design and shots on our way, including when Karloff is going outside and looking up at the moon and being taken over by evil. We've got his profile, and again, that beautiful, muscular, little body against the night sky and the tree branches, and I'm 100% sure that inspired the equally gorgeous shot of Norman in Psycho after he's committed the first murder and he hears Arbogast, right? Someone's calling for Arbogast?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, after he's committed the 2 murders, I guess. You know the one I'm talking about, that famous shot by the swamp.
Another really important cinematic innovation here, or very unusual anyway, is the subjective camera interlude. It's like a minute or 2 where the camera just floats around the...
Very Hitchcockian too, but with a narration.
Exactly. It's Pilzig talking about his wonderful construct, and you go up the stairs. You don't see any people. You just move around the environment with the camera.
Eisenberg singles that out, yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. Certainly not something that you were going to see in just about any other Hollywood film of 1934.
Speaking of Hitchcock, Eisenberg is actually talking about this like it was a scene that was filmed, but not in the release print, in which Ulmer appeared at the end of the movie in a cameo as the 2 fleeing Americans try to hail a car on the road leaving from Pilzig's compound. The driver that stops for them, as if anticipating a signature touch of Hitchcock, was to be none other than the director himself. "Will you take us to Visegrad?" inquires Peter. The driver then offers the tart response, "I'm not going to Visegrad. I'm going to a sanatorium to rest up after making the Black Cat in 14 days. Which, by the way, sounds way more like the fourth wall breaking of Jerry Lewis at the end of his films than like anything Hitchcock ever did.
No, Hitchcock never breaks the fourth wall that way with his cameos.
Well, other than his presence itself.
Sure.
But he doesn't refer to himself as the director and comment on the making of the film.
No, I'm glad they didn't do that, though. I don't think that would be quite right for this movie.
No, it works when Jerry Lewis does it.
Alluded earlier to the comic interplay with Henry Armetta and his lieutenant, those 2 guys from the police, talking about...
Yeah, the Borscht Belt routine.
Yeah, the relative attractions of these 2 different...
Probably exactly the same. They're actually in a specific set of mountains.
Yeah, the Carpathians, which are mostly in Hungary, but they could go into Romania as well.
Okay.
Transylvania.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the idea, that there was going to be a shout-out to Dracula, or a callback to Dracula, except with the innovation... Well, that is a stunning innovation to transpose the Gothic castle to this modernist contraption.
Instead of ancient battlements, you've got the ultra-modern...
Again, to me, it just screams fascism.
Yes, absolutely.
And the closest visual analog, as far as I'm concerned, out of the iconography I'm familiar with, everyone talks about Caligari. I don't think it looks at all like Caligari, but it does look something like Metropolis.
Sure.
Not anything actually featured in Metropolis, but the idea.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's definitely...
And I think even Karloff himself, the thing that he most looks like in this movie is the Metropolis robot.
Really?
Yeah, that's what he reminds me of.
Maria?
Yeah.
No, that's interesting. I didn't think of that.
He just evokes it for me somehow.
Well, he does move robotically.
Everyone does, though. I mean, not everyone, but the two principal men and their manservants, they move like somnambulists. Yeah.
That's true. It's just our Americans who wish they had gone to Niagara Falls who...
They kind of bounce around the place.
They have a rough time.
And then what on earth is going on with that fallen over double cross for the Black Mass scene that she faints on for about the 5th time in the movie?
Could be something Satanists might use. Just sets the mood for them.
Well, I'll just close with a couple of other tidbits from the Eisenberg book. Polzig embodied a sadistic personality that Ulmer purportedly modeled on Fritz Lang.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, sure, you can, from what you've heard of Lang, you can
I'm a
imagine
great
that.
admirer of Fritz Lang's films. As a person, he doesn't come across so well whenever you hear about his behavior.
And Vertigas' entry into battle 18 years previously, that is 1916, coincides with the year that Ulmer's father died in Austrian uniform.
So this is his dad.
I didn't think of it that way.
Isn't that what Eisenberg is implying?
Well, no, just that there's a personal connection for Ulmer to the war that's, I guess, associated with the more sympathetic figure.
All right. Well, if you haven't seen The Black Cat, you really should. And check out the films of Edgar Ulmer after he was hounded out of the studio system and forced to forge a completely unique path through the back alleys of Poverty Row.
This is one of those cinephile entries, The Black Cat, that should be a very easy entry point. Like, I can't imagine anyone of any age not getting a lot of pleasure out of this film, but, I mean, let me know if you're wrong.
Yeah.
Let me know if I'm wrong.
Let me know if you're wrong, because...
I think you're the one who's wrong here.
Yeah. Now we move on to James Whale's adaptation of John Galsworthy's final novel, One More River. I had never seen this film before. I really loved it.
Yeah, it was something remarkable.
Elise, I have another candidate for our Acteurist Oeuvre Review. Diana Wynyard, I think, would be quite a rewarding subject.
She looked so familiar to me, and yet I looked at her filmography, and I couldn't think of anything I'd seen her in.
I've only seen her in a couple of movies, but she's very memorable in them, and her filmography is quite manageable, so I'm going to push for her at some point. That'll be in 2025 or later.
Yeah, she's one of those actresses that was mainly on the stage.
Yeah, she's incredible in this movie, and she's also great in Gaslight. She's in the original Gaslight.
Right.
Very good in that movie. And Reunion in Vienna is another one I've seen.
And I also exclaimed during the opening credits because of the inclusion of Mrs. Patrick Campbell.
Yes.
Who I didn't even know that she made any films. I know her through her association with George Bernard Shaw, but I barely know anything about him. However, I just did a lot of reading about that period of English theater. I had remembered them as having an affair. Apparently the affair was platonic.
Okay.
I believe they were both married at the time. Well, she was for certain, and I think he was too. But it was intense, and there was quite an exchange of letters. And he created the role of Eliza Doolittle in Pygmalion for her, although she was in her 40s at the time, but it made no difference, because that's just, if you were a famous stage actress in those days, you could keep playing any part into your 50s.
And here she plays a great part.
Looking at her very limited filmography, she is in a film that you like a lot that we have seen together.
What's that?
She is the pawnbroker in Sternberg's Crime and Punishment.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that movie.
A small but important role.
One day we'll be doing it on the podcast. I'm going to find a way. Maybe a Dostoevsky special subject.
Yeah, she is very much fun in this movie.
Yeah. And everyone is great. This has an incredible cast. I mean, Diana Wynyard is the indisputed star of the film. So much of it revolves around her plight and her reactions to the social system that is set up to cage her in. But she is ably supported by quite an array of talent here. You've got C. Aubrey Smith as her dad. You've got Jane Wyatt as her sympathetic sister. You've got Henry Stevenson as her uncle, who's kind of a better dad than her dad, I think. Frank Lawton I really liked in this movie. I know him best as the adult David Copperfield from the MGM film, which we'll be seeing not too long from now in our 1935 Hollywood studios.
So I couldn't find out any information about how this project with this all-British cast came about. Another experiment from Lemley, I guess. The novel was a bestseller, but the movie apparently didn't do that well. I don't know why. It could have been because of the interference of the Breen office, because obviously a lot of the most scandalous parts of it had to be extremely glossed over.
As is, it's terrific.
Yeah, but it's very much a study of the British upper class that doesn't necessarily have the sensationalistic angles it might otherwise have to draw in a movie audience, an American movie audience.
No, of course not. And Dinah Wynyard was not someone who ever really took hold of the American public's imagination.
And you can see why in this movie, and we'll talk about her performance. John Galsworthy, we should talk a little bit about him.
He's another one of these formerly really, really respected writers who kind of fell off the map when the modernists took over.
Most people didn't fall off the map the way Fanny Hurst did, with sort of tin cans attached to her by the critics. They just silently disappeared.
Yeah, Galsworthy I've always thought of as in the class with someone like Arnold Bennett. These people were huge, and now nobody talks about them. I did a master's in English literature without ever coming close to a John Galsworthy book, but I do want to read some now. The Forsyte Saga, I mean, they've been on my distant radar for a long time, because I know that I like this kind of writing.
So this seems to have been the final entry in a trilogy that was a spin-off from the Forsyte Saga.
There are multiple Forsyte trilogies, right? So he
So
just
there-
wrote
there's
a
like-
lot of books.
There's like epicycles,
Yeah,
like Galileo's model of the universe.
very prolific. Gonna explore that someday.
I was trying to figure out a little bit about his politics.
Well, he was definitely a progressive, right?
Well, yes, he was particularly progressive in the area of such things as animal rights,
Yes,
women's rights,
I read about that too. Yeah.
clearly from this movie, and prison reform. But you and I were trying to get a bead on what was going on with all this discussion of politics at the beginning of the movie, of conservative politics for this aristocratic class, and whether that was going to become a subject for the movie, which it does not do directly, but based on one play that he wrote about a labor dispute, he seems to have been some analog to what we would now call a moderate or a centrist. There's the extremes and both sides are bad.
I think the only clue that we get of that in this film is that old guy that they're trying to drag to the polls, and the woman he lives with says that he hasn't gone to the polls since Mr. Gladstone died, right? So that makes him a liberal, and the Liberal Party basically had ceased to exist as a force by the 1930s. It had been replaced by the Labour Party. So possibly Galsworthy didn't like that. In this film, it makes sense that they're all conservatives and that one of their number is a conservative politician. People in this group would have been.
It's hard to understand, though, why that's highlighted in the film when nothing is really done with it now. Then we have to start talking about James Whale. I have no idea what James Whale's politics were, but he certainly was working class. Whether he had socialist politics himself, it is probable that he was looking with an ironic eye at this class, but then so was Galsworthy. He's not exactly presenting this class as, well, he's more interested in their conservative sexual mores.
Yeah, exactly. They're all colonialists as well, right? They've all been to Sri Lanka, which they call Ceylon, and they've all taken a lot of loot. Even Frank Lawton, who was there as a working man, he was working on a tea plantation that failed.
Yes, that's true, yeah.
But the rich family, they all did their tour of duty down there exploiting.
And obviously, even this relationship, someone who's British would have to tell me more about this, but it seems to me that this depiction of this relationship where class is not an issue between this working man and this aristocratic woman would in itself be pretty shockingly progressive, just the fact that there is not any class prejudice.
Yeah, he works at a stable.
Yeah, arranged by her uncle, her kindly conservative uncle. He is not above a patronage. I wasn't able to find out, like I said, how this production exactly came about, but Whale was a familiar figure in British theatre from a 1928 production of R.C. Sherriff's Journey's End.
Yeah, adapted as a film not long afterwards.
And then R.C. Sherriff became his frequent screenwriter, as he is on this film. And then Journey's End became established as a stage classic. I don't know, that may be how Whale Whale was able to get all of these stage luminaries. Who knows? I don't know how it came about, but that is his background.
Well, Whale was riding high at this time, right? Frankenstein was such a gigantic hit.
Or who would know who to get? I mean, it would have to be Whale himself.
Laemmle Jr. was giving the green light to just about anything Whale wanted to do, from what I understand. I mean, they definitely wanted him to keep mixing in horror films, but that's not the only thing he was doing, as we've seen.
Now, the more Whale we see,
the better he gets.
Well, this one seems to be confirming for me the auteur theory we were starting to sketch when we did Waterloo Bridge, where I referred to both Bride of Frankenstein and Showboat. Whale does seem to be interested in stories about sexual repression and the problems it causes.
Oh, most definitely.
And sexual taboos, as the miscegenation in Showboat.
In particular, in the problems that women are facing due to that sexual regime.
Yeah, which is something that Galsworthy himself was very interested in, so that is a meeting of minds here.
Yeah, it's a very congenial pairing. We should set this up a little bit. We open on a ship coming back from Sri Lanka. Very quickly, we're introduced to Diana Wynyard, who is leaving her husband, an official in Sri Lanka. She's met this young man on the ship, played by Frank Lawton. Both of them are talking about what they're going to do when they get to England. They're going to need to get a job.
Exactly. They both need to find jobs. They have that in common, which made me immediately start wondering about everybody's class, particularly considering that they're speaking in what to me sounds like the same upper class or middle class accent.
When she gets home, we do find out that
she's fantastically rich.
Yes. She married this member of the civil service, played by Colin Clive. We don't meet him for quite a while, but he'll be around, don't worry. Frank Lawton's character, he definitely has an educated accent.
I'm sure it's all explained in the novel, but it's not explained in the movie at all.
But yes, he is basically a working man. He likes to work with horses. A lot of this is about how is she going to live as a separated woman in England in the early 1930s.
Well, it seems to be about that, but then turns into something more akin to gothic horror.
Well, it certainly does, because her plans get thrown completely off when her abusive husband follows her home.
Now, but first of all, we get, as we said, a lot of scene setting and establishing of the daily lives of this class that she moves in, and this conservative election that they're involved in.
Yeah, so she has a great relationship with her sister, played by Jane Wyatt. This is an early
really
role
notable
for Jane Wyatt, who will do many notable things during the rest of her career, including up here in Lost Horizon, Father Knows Best, and Star Trek as Spock's mom.
Yep, his human mom.
Jane Wyatt is married to Reginald Denny, so again we're seeing former superstar Reginald Denny, name above the title in silent cinema. He's way down on the cast list here again. We saw him in The Little Minister, playing a guy on horseback, threatening some people in a town. Here, he's got a slightly bigger role. He's a politician for the Conservative Party who is angry about the devaluation of the British pound.
Right. And this, as in all of the Whale films from this period, very dark material is combined with very broad comedy interludes. So this Conservative Party politician is not treated at all in a respectful way by Whale.
No, not at all. But he's also not any kind of a villain. He's kind of a bumbling, lovable guy.
Sure.
Which is, Reginald Denny is good at that. That's kind of what he moved into in the 30s. Probably best known to people nowadays as Frank Crawley from Rebecca, a sympathetic denizen of Manderley. It comes out under pressure. She really doesn't want to talk about this at all, but she has to have some explanation for her family for why she took this drastic step.
First of all, she talks about it with her sister.
Yeah, but even there she's reticent. She doesn't really want to talk about what happened.
Well, reticent is the key word for her character until the very end.
Yeah, but she does reveal that her husband used a whip on her and was just brutal to her in general. And
well, that becomes the sort of symbol that she just pulls that out to indicate to everybody metonymically that this is what her husband was capable of.
The fascinating thing about this movie is that, she has to go there to draw any kind of attention to what she's going through.
To get sympathy, because it's not about justice, it's about who's going to be more sympathized with.
Yeah, but not only that, it's just that everyone expects husbands to push their wives around.
Oh, yeah, she has to let them know, no, this, and the judge explicitly says that during the trial, so she has to say, no, this is not normal pushing around.
She's treading such a fine line here, and she does not want to take a step that I feel like she would have every right to do, which is expose him as a guy that whips his wife.
Well, I mean, we've just been seeing a similar sort of plot with a lower class character in Peyton Place, the original series that we've been watching together with a lot of pleasure. The idea being that if she exposes this, she's going to get scandal and publicity.
Yeah, of course.
Everybody in their set will know about it, everybody will read about it in the papers, and it will fall as harshly on her as on him.
On her family, I think, is the more important thing, right? They won't be able to live that down in their mansion out there. But also she does say several times, I don't want to ruin his career. And, you know, I would want to ruin his career, frankly, if someone treated me the way he treats her.
Well, he does have that speech in the car with...
He's two people.
With the sister saying he's a Jekyll and a Hyde, and he's terrible in his personal life, but he's a professional, and I guess maybe she thinks he's doing good work or something?
Maybe. Yeah, he's kind of charming at times. He's a victim in some ways as well of the patriarchal system, which nurtured in him this overweening sense of mastery that he just gives into continuously whenever he gets near her. It's horrifying. Really brilliant film for showing how a man can just slip into that as soon as... It's like a nightmare as soon as they're alone.
Well, yeah, it was actually reminding me of another Universal film, Backstreet, in the way that it becomes a sort of gothic horror story about patriarchy.
Really packs a punch.
Although, in a, so to speak, in a very different way. Yeah, because... particularly with this upper-class, reticent British setting, where she doesn't want to talk about things and she doesn't show emotion about anything, it becomes very shocking the first time they encounter each other in the house. And she says, well, yes, I am going to have to face him, because sooner or later it's going to be necessary, but she makes her uncle promise to be on call. When they're together alone in that room, and the way she flattens herself, the blocking of how she flattens herself against the wall, like you hardly ever see anything expressing that kind of physical terror of an abused person in a film of this time. It's more commonplace now, you'd see it all the time in television, but I can't think of anything from this period like that.
No, not in this ostensibly non-horror setting, right? Like,
well, even in, I can't think of any setting where a wife character acts like this.
No, quite something. Diana Wynyard is just a unique performer, I find. She's very masterful
in this movie, while also expressing her terror.
It's an incredibly well-judged performance.
She may actually, and the character is very interesting because, like Oscar Wilde, she may actually lose the case by being too witty and assertive in the stand.
Just finds it all demeaning, and she has no trouble telling the prosecution so. The laws governing adultery and divorce in England were fodder for another 1934 film that we'll be covering later this year, which is The Gay Divorcee, the stuff about the co-respondent.
Sure.
That whole movie revolves around the need to pay a co-respondent to play this role so you can get out of your marriage, right? So I was familiar with the exact way that this has to go. The script has to be followed.
This has been done a million times since, too. And,
and
before,
course.
Probably.
Yeah, just wanted to remark upon the similarity of that aspect of it. Now, everything else about it is different from The Gay Divorcee. And she does have this affection for the Frank Lawton character, Tony Croon.
Yeah, but she says that she has been left a burnt-out husk by this relationship.
She has no romance left in her.
Yeah.
So she likes hanging out with them. She needs friends. She doesn't want to be sitting around by herself, but she has no interest in embarking upon any other kind of passionate affair.
And she also doesn't know what's going to happen with her marriage, so that would also be ill-advised.
But she does seem like if he just stayed in Sri Lanka, left her alone, let her take up this new job as secretary to her politician brother-in-law, that's the kind of life she enjoys. She loves her new little apartment, and she likes living on a budget. She likes going to grubby little restaurants with her platonic friend who doesn't want to be platonic.
Yeah, he's
not pressuring her.
She's sort of a conservative bohemian.
Yeah, exactly. There aren't many movies from the 30s that have these kinds of plot elements to them, I don't think. You know? I mean, she's just making her own way here.
Yeah, well, Galsworthy was unusual.
Yeah, and James Whale. And the way he brings it all to us, it just seems very, you really seep into her point of view as the movie goes along. You're like, why can't she just live this life? Seems fine to me.
Yeah, there's really no polemics.
No, it just seems very sensible what she's doing. And then Colin Clive just shows up and just keeps fucking things up horrifyingly.
Well, yeah, first of all, she's afraid that he's going to discover her because she'll be vulnerable living on her own. I mean, she's sure that he's just going to beat her up again anytime they're alone
and
together.
Rape her.
And rape her. But, well, I was getting to that, since she won't have anyone on call. So she's taking, in order to live this independent life that she wants to lead and not get involved with this man that she doesn't have feelings for, she is taking a very big risk here. So the first time she spots him, having spotted her, the sister gets rid of him very easily because I guess he doesn't want to show himself as a monster to anyone else.
No, he doesn't behave that way with anybody else. And again, I don't think that is shown to be purely duplicity. I think that it's something that he can't control when he's around her.
It's part of his sex drive or emotional drive.
So he really is just being himself when he's with the sister as well. And he just thinks, well, this is how men are, you get alone with your wife, you are entitled to her body, and there's nothing she can do to stop you. The law is on your side, and we see that there are no repercussions for him for anything he does.
Well, he knows that he gets out of control.
Yeah, but again, he's not going to get in trouble for it.
Sure, and then the next time, obviously, as you say, he comes over. Well, this is a pretty interesting sequence where the sister knows about her fears about him finding her, and we see him force his way inside, and then we see the sister worrying about her and trying to reach her for hours and hours. And I don't know if the way this pans out was to get around the Breen office, because I don't know what was in the novel, but it turns out very fascinatingly, because we are anticipating that she will be dead or in a bloody pulp.
No, all that happened is he went over there, forced her to have sex with him, and left, feeling like he's had some kind of triumph and they're back on track.
She has no bruises, and again, she is playing it so coolly.
She's making herself some tea.
Serving tea to the sister that I've never seen a reaction to rape like this in any other film except Verhoeven's Elle.
Yeah, it's so chilling because she's basically telling us that women have been raised to expect this to happen to them.
Well, but she also doesn't, because she knows she's been horribly violated and she's angry about it.
Right, but she has no recourse. And no one she can even really tell about it.
No, because she can't describe it because it is so horrible and intimate. I mean, that is the real reason she can never offer any description of what he's been doing to her, because it is so horrible and intimate. She'd probably have a complete nervous breakdown if she actually described it.
Right.
I mean, she's just holding this together. There's no psychiatrist she can go to for this.
No.
Not at this point.
She really is holding it together because she's able to have fun with Tony at other times, which is astounding. But again, I also find that chilling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When her husband discovers that, no, this act that he committed against her did not put her back on track for resuming their marriage, and that she's going to stand firm and she's going to retreat into her ancestral mansion, her dad really, really wants her to go back to him. He doesn't see any other way for this to go.
Well, until she pulls out the riding crop story again.
Yeah, exactly. She has to at that point. But even there, C. Aubrey Smith doesn't go out and thrash him or commence legal proceedings against him. No. There's nothing you can do. Just, okay, your family is now agreed. I guess you don't have to go back to him.
And in that scene, she does allude to the fact that he forced sex on her, and again, that's clearly not something a gentleman does.
No, but again, there's nothing other gentlemen can do to someone behaving like that.
No, and it's not the old days. You can't just, or your father or your brother might just go and shoot them.
Right.
So now there's nothing you can do.
No, you took some vows and you're stuck with this guy. And the only way she gets out of it is that Colin Clive is so mercurial that he's deeply unmanned and offended that his act of rape did not bring her back into the fold with him. And so he hires detectives so that he can initiate divorce proceedings.
I was going to say, remember the plot in The Age of Innocence has some of that in the background too.
It does, yeah.
What do you think of the depiction of these bumbling detectives? Another
Well, they're actually pretty effective.
Tonal interlude. Well, yeah, they're not bumbling, they just seem bumbling, and they're portrayed comically or satirically again.
Goofy, kind of Cockney-sounding guys who eavesdrop and observe every facet of this platonic relationship, which is nevertheless very close to being something that looks like dating, right?
Well, all that has to happen is that they have to catch the two of them looking like they're in a romantic relationship. They don't have to catch them indisputably in the act of sex, because it's the accumulation of evidence that's going to work against them.
Yeah, it's the same thing as in Gay Divorcee. They don't actually have to have sex with the correspondent. They just have to be caught in a hotel room with music on. That's it.
And in this case, we get something similar to the Now Voyager incident.
It's true.
Except that it doesn't lead to sex in this case, because they don't actually, take up overnight residence in a nearby cabin. They stay in the car, and that car looks like it would be hard to have sex in. It's not like a convertible or anything.
No, and Diana Wynyard is actually committed to this idea of just hanging out with Lawton and not having sex with them, no matter how much time they spend alone together. It's not really on the table, and he knows it, and he's accepted that.
Well, she's deeply questioned on the witness stand about, didn't she understand what torture that would be?
And she does
for
say,
a man who was in love with her.
Yeah, she says, now that I think about it, maybe he did have an erection he had nothing he could do with for a long time there.
And that was totally my fault and very rude of me, but,
yeah.
But I didn't think about it at the time.
Yeah, and even so, he kind of asked for it anyway by getting into a relationship when the terms were clearly laid out, and he doesn't ever act petulant or upset with her.
But some of the sort of parsing of all of this stuff in the trial is very interesting and very hilarious. He is also questioned on how could you say that you really have strong feelings for this woman when you didn't rape her, when you had an opportunity.
That's right, because the society takes Colin Clive's point of view on this, that if you're alone with a woman that you're attracted to, you will inevitably force her to have sex with you.
I hate all of the stuff that gets associated with this idea of rape culture.
But this is rape culture.
But this is an actual depiction of how that concept, it's just a concept, it's just a way of looking at a particular aspect of culture, not all of culture, works.
Yeah. The laws and the assumptions amongst the general populace support that idea.
And the laws obviously are better now, but a lot of the assumptions haven't changed.
Right. And Henry Stevenson says, I really like that. There's a two-part move there. He says, no, our laws aren't nearly so barbarous as they used to be. And then he reads what they are, and it's like, well, they sound pretty bad. And he himself remarks later on, we really need to change these laws. He was sounding a little bit more optimistic about progress until he actually looked into it and saw how it was affecting his beloved niece.
He says, oh, yes, our laws are very progressive about divorce now. And then he opens up the book and he starts reading, look, a husband can initiate divorce if such and such a thing happens.
Right.
And then we also know from that reading that it's this man who has no money who's going to be forced to pay money, possibly pay damages that he doesn't have.
Exactly.
If they're caught together.
Punitive.
So that's really the way that she's more inconsiderate of him. But the two of them, as they say themselves, are so innocent that they didn't realize that by doing nothing, they say they didn't even realize he would have detectives on them, which of course we know because he says, I'm going to have to find an alternative.
Exactly.
After her father won't force her to go back to him.
It's a segue right from his words saying, I'm going to find an alternative to our first meeting of the detective, right?
But we have to believe that these two are too naive to comprehend that.
No, they don't know that. They just are going about their lives.
They're like Rodney on Peyton Place.
Yeah.
If we didn't have intercourse, then no one can possibly pin intercourse on us.
Yeah, the courtroom sequence, we've got a lawyer named Forsythe.
Seems to be the only connection to the Forsythe saga. He's the liberal defense lawyer?
Yeah, Alan Mowbray. And the prosecutor is Lionel Atwill.
No, I don't think I even noticed.
You didn't notice it was Lionel Atwill?
No.
Sternberg's double.
Well, he's got a wig on.
He doesn't have a mustache in this movie
Well, how
either.
could I recognize him then?
Well, Lionel Atwill, he's a sinister figure. And
he is very sinister in this movie.
He is. He's making all kinds of snide accusations. The judge is a complete oaf.
Yeah, and he does cause titters in the courtroom when he dismisses the idea that the husband is abusive, because all husbands have done something they should apologize for.
So casually brutal.
Unless she spills every dirty little detail, there is no hope of them actually comprehending that this is serious.
Right, and then that's a double-edged sword, as you say, because she will attract the wrong kind of notoriety. Even if people take pity on her, it'll be pity of a sort that no woman would want to attract in that society, right? She would never be able to live down the idea of him beating and raping her.
Yeah.
So
Which, again,
it's a no-win situation.
Again, that hasn't changed at all.
No, not really. James Whale, very prescient. We should talk a little bit more about her aunt.
Yeah, Mrs. Patrick Campbell was a lot of fun in this movie, especially her introduction, going on a dithering monologue that ends with her talking about how she wanted to be a he-goat.
Yes. So it was not to be milked.
Yes.
The indignity of being milked. A he-goat not on a farm, but on the Alps or something, majestically standing atop.
Yeah, not just tied to a post or something in a garden in England.
She talks about some of her digestive complaints.
Flatulence. She actually got the word flatulence in there.
So many weird things in this movie. Who knows if that's in the book or they just threw that in as a kind... I mean, that almost feels like it comes out of the old Dark House or something.
Well, that was written by a contemporary novelist as well, J.B. Priestley.
Yeah, and Sheriff wrote the screenplay for that,
Yeah.
and Whale directed it.
And he's another contemporary British playwright, so...
Such a great movie, such a wonderful...
Journey's End, incidentally, of course, was about World War I, tying into our first movie.
This movie is a real find, and I'm so delighted that it is in good shape. The
Beautiful shape.
version that's circulating right now. Unlike some of the other Whale movies we've watched in the past, which we loved, even though we couldn't even see them properly at
Beautiful
times.
shape, but not talked about very much, it seems.
No, not at all.
Even though, like I said, it really does fit in with a auteurist idea of James Whale's interest as a director.
Well, there isn't nearly enough about James Whale out there. So much of it centers on his horror output, which is tremendous, but all these other movies he made are the things that people need to see and think about.
If anyone from TIFF Lightbox, probably not, because I think 2 people from Ontario listen to this show, but if anyone from TIFF Lightbox listens to this, how about when we finally all get back in the theater, a James Whale retrospective, please?
Oh, that would be so good. If they could get good prints of everything.
Or even if they can't. Like, you remember Dorothy Arzner, that was hit and miss.
No, they were pretty good.
Oh, right, Jodie Foster restored.
Yeah, they had those Jodie Foster
them.
restorations, some of which are not on home video. The only way to see clear prints of some of those films is to watch them at a rep theater, if they ever bring in the 35mm.
Yeah, but a lot of the retrospectives, it is hit and miss, and I still want to see them anyway.
James Whale, please, cover the entire career.
So yeah, as we were saying, in the trial sequence, and we still haven't talked about the incredible sort of twist at the end.
Oh yeah, we must.
In the trial sequence, when she gets on trial, she's a very bad witness because she won't talk about anything that would actually turn the case in their favor. And she is very emancipated.
Yeah.
She is very assertive and unapologetic and aggressive, not playing the sympathetic victim that she should be doing. Makes many tart and witty remarks back at the prosecutor who's hounding her. And the one that gives her away is when she states, but she won't explain why, she didn't consider herself a married woman after leaving her husband. And then there's we pan to a lot of people looking shocked and Colin Clive looking triumphant. And he knows he's won the case at that point.
It really does mean something for him, because divorced the other way, we're told he would lose his job in the civil service. So, no repercussions for this fucker. He's gonna go back to Sri Lanka,
Find another woman to beat. And...
Exactly. Nothing's gonna happen to him. No justice in this world.
He's like the husband in that Setsuko Hara movie, that Nerusa movie, The Sound of the Mountain.
Yeah, Ken Urahara.
Yeah, they're very similar, actually.
He's a brutal fucker, too. Yeah. She loses the case. However, the jury does decide that no damages will be paid. So
her boyfriend won't be, well, not her boyfriend yet, but he won't be complete. I keep forgetting his name.
Tony.
Of course, Tony. That's not his real name, but he's called Tony. So Tony at least won't be ruined by this.
Right, because he has no money. Now, I was thinking, I don't know, C. Aubrey Smith obviously could give him the $2,000 to pay it.
If he's willing to accept it.
Yeah.
We don't get any of that, though. We don't find out any about that.
It doesn't come up. So the jury
struck
a balance there.
But C. Aubrey Smith is, again, a kindly conservative man who justifies the continuance of this class, so possibly he did do that to help out.
After all of that, she is now free as well, so she gets something out of the deal, even though she is presented as the wrongdoer in the marriage.
And now she's like, well, we can do anything we want to. And this is where I'm like,
let's pull down the blinds.
how did the Breen office approve this? How? Because she's decided that since we've been accused of having an affair, we can now have sex out of wedlock with impunity.
And I will tell you, it is actually a really sexually exciting scene.
Yeah.
She is really...
You're going to tell me that as a straight man, are you?
She's really pouring on the erotica here.
Well, yeah, and Whale has her filmed very seductively.
And her outfit and everything.
Leaning back on the love seat or whatever. The divan.
She basically does everything in this movie, because you don't expect this scene from her.
Nope.
And neither does Frank Lawton. He's like, what the hell is happening here?
And she's just telling him, like, I don't know if this is ultimately her emotional reaction to everything that's gone on. It's not played that way, but you do have to wonder where this is all coming from. Clearly she has to let off steam in some way.
Exactly.
And this is it, and she tells him that she's going to give herself to him to pay the debt.
Well, to me,
she owes him.
Yeah, what I felt like in that scene is that they finally worn her down to the point where she, at that moment, is accepting this idea that all men are completely disgusting fucks who will take any opportunity they can to have sex with her, whether they have to force her or fall in a debt.
With this background of rape in the movie, it is very weird for her to sort of offer herself up as if it is some sort of bargain or coercive arrangement.
Well, yeah, she uses all of that terminology, and he is just horrified. He's like, that's not what I was getting into. That's not what I've ever wanted from you. And he runs away.
Well, yeah, he's in love with her.
Yeah, and she realizes what she's done, but at the same time, the movie doesn't punish her for it at all.
No.
It's just
and she's not
working through psychologically of what she's gone through.
Like, this is something very, again, unique to Whale and his sense of the damage that sexual shame does. In a lot of movies, a woman offering herself in this way would be filmed and blocked and acted in a way that is debasing or humiliating. Think of the scene in Jezebel.
Yeah.
Where she offers herself to Henry Fonda.
Yeah, on her knees. Yeah, no, this is very masterful. This is like, here I am.
Yeah, and as you say, it's not filmed in a way to degrade her.
No, not at all. You're with her. You're not with him. I mean, you experience his reaction through her subjectivity. And yeah, in a lot of other movies, or most other movies from this period, if she took this step, that would be the first step into hell, right? And then it'd be over for her. She would never have any self-respect again or anything like that.
Again, how did he get this past the Breen office? Because they're idiots, that's why.
Right. So instead, they have this moment where she gets it out of her system. She gets the night to think about it. He goes off and wanders the town thinking about this. Has something wonderful been lost between them or not? And he comes back to see her the next day.
Sort of like in Waterloo Bridge.
It's got a lot of similarities with a much happier ending.
Yeah.
Because they are able to meet again and discuss what happened and make a plan to move forward.
Well, I mean, the happier ending has a lot to do with the fact that, well, I was going to say the fact that she has money. Of course, she has gone through sexual hell.
No, but it does make a difference, I think. And I think Whale is saying it makes a difference that in this case, the woman is the one with more wealth behind her. Because Waterloo Bridge, the biggest problem for Mae Clarke is, yeah, she will never really be accepted into this family.
And she'll ruin his life.
Yeah. It doesn't work quite the same way when it's the other way around.
Right, because she will be able to continue having the same social life because she has not revealed all of these secrets.
Right. Yeah, it's an amazing movie.
Yep, it's very unique.
And we'll be doing more Whale films as we go through the 30s, so join us for them at that time.
So I guess the last thing I have to talk about is, so you know our friend Fish Beast on Instagram?
Yes.
He's listened to some versions of our podcast. I don't know if he listens to this one.
Peter Fishbeast, yeah.
Yeah, we've interacted with him.
Oh yeah, of course.
With regard to this podcast. Anyway, so he made a list of best movies of the last year or two, pre-COVID, he specified, and at the top of his list was the new Charlie Kaufman movie. So the first live action movie he's made since Synecdoche, New York, which is called...
I'm Thinking of Ending Things.
Yes, right? So I watched it last night based on that. It just got in my head because we had loved Synecdoche, New York a lot, and we did cover it on our podcast.
Yes, the Time Travel podcast.
The Time Travel podcast, the Time Travel movie podcast, as it turned out.
That's one of my favorite episodes where we talked about Synecdoche, New York, and our town.
Well, it was one of the handful of episodes episodes where we liked the movies we were talking about. That's why that podcast ended before we had actually exhausted every time travel movie ever made. Anyway.
Now, I didn't watch it with you because I was reading Fanny Hurst books.
Yeah, in preparation for next week's episode. Kaufman is really hit and miss for me, and mostly miss as a screenwriter directed by other people, with a partial exception for The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which you like a lot, and we did another good episode about it.
I love that movie, yeah.
But again, I thought this new movie was absolutely brilliant. It was an extraordinary experience, even on my laptop on Netflix, which is, I guess, the only way to watch it. It's one of those Netflix movies that was given a limited theater release. And now this is the only way for now that you can see it. Because Dave hasn't watched it, I have to be a little cryptic in my comments on it. But I will say, Dave, to entice you even more, it fully confirms the track we were on in our discussion that was introduced by you in our discussion about Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind in that podcast episode.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it. I don't know exactly why I hadn't watched it already. I guess it's just because we've been doing other things this year. Yep. You know, we've been watching a lot of Peyton Place and watching movies for the podcast reading and writing. When
you have watched it, though, maybe we'll give it a little discussion on the cast because we have our schedule planned for the next 5 years or something, so it's going to be a long time before we get to do Charlie Kaufman.
Yeah, but we will do a Charlie Kaufman episode, I'm sure, in the future.
The future of our lives.
A special subject in 2026, possibly. So I guess that's it for us this week. Next week, we're going to be staying with Universal, and actually even Universal 1934 for the first half. We're going to be talking about Imitations of Life. So we'll be doing Fanny Hurst's novel, then the John M. Stahl film based on the novel, but very different. And then the Douglas Sirk film from 1959.
Also completely different from the other two things.
So we're going to be talking about all three of them in succession. You may not have time to read the book these days, but try to, because we're going to talk about the book in its entirety, then the film, and then the film. This is a special subject we chose together.
Yeah, it worked out even better than planned, because we couldn't have been aware that the novel would be so different from the other two films.
No, I'm really looking forward to it. Hopefully you'll all be there for Imitations of Life.
See you then.